Welcome back to Checkpoint. Now, our discussion tonight focuses on the economy and that budget that was read out last week that was said by some economists to be pro-poor. But that budget came on the back of a study that was done by Twaweza East Africa, and it's titled Going Without. Some really interesting findings, and that is why our question today that we're asking you on social media is, what are some of the sacrifices you are making, if any, when money becomes tight? Going Without Household Economics in Kenya is the name of that study by Twaweza East Africa. Let's take a look at some of those numbers now. Some very interesting yet saddening figures, anecdotal evidence of just how tough life is for Kenyans in the country. So take a look at this one. 4 in 10 out of those who were surveyed reported having gone the whole day without any food due to lack of money, and a further 53% reported that their households ran out of food during the same 3-month period. Now, it gets worse. 44% of households that have school children reported having withdrawn them from school due to financial pressures. Let's just stay here for a moment. Now, there was a question they were asked. In the last 6 months, did any of the school-going house members have to drop out of school, going to school because school fees couldn't be paid or school supplies couldn't be provided? 44% of them said yes. So some interesting ones. But then it gets even worse because, take a look at this figure, 8 in 10 Kenyan households claim that their daily income is insufficient for their needs. So this is what, about 8% of those figures, a clear majority reporting that their daily household income is not sufficient for their needs. And this figure, by the way, goes across the different wealth groups. That is from the poorest right up to the wealthiest households. It was ranging between 77% and 81%. So not a good figure when you take a look at some of these numbers here. And this forms the basis of our discussion. Again, what are some of the things that you are going without when things are tough? And things have been tough. Remember, again, the inflation rate for March hit the double digit. We're about 10% now. It went up to 9% the previous month. So things are getting a little tighter. What are you going without? Please let me know. The hashtag is Checkpoint. But let's talk a little bit more about these numbers and how they were arrived at. And let's speak to the person that is in charge of conducting this survey. I forget this last one, but it's very important. 75% of people who are living in rental homes reported being late or unable to pay rent over the last 12 months. So if you take a look at all these basic needs, that's food, shelter, and education, Kenyans are struggling, they're suffering, according to this study. We'll talk about whether the budget this year is something that will ease the suffering of these people. But let's talk a little bit more about this study now with Victor Rateng, who's a senior program officer at Twaweza East Africa. He joins me live now from our studios in Mombasa. Victor, good evening and thanks for joining us. So this study is interesting. Speak to us about its relevance coming with the budget that was just read, that many say perhaps will give some sort of cushioning for them. And, you know, just the state of the economy at this point.
Thank you, Yvonne. Our survey is called Sauti za Wananchi, Citizens' Voices, and it basically focuses on citizens' realities, experiences, and attitudes. So what we have here is what Kenyans are telling us about their day-to-day experiences with the economy. And what we got from this survey is telling, and I'm sure the government should be following, because citizens are basically surviving. Citizens do not have enough to meet their daily needs. What they're telling us is that on a daily basis, they need at least 100 shillings per person in the household to meet their basic needs. So in a household of 4 people, that means the minimum required amount is 400 shillings. And if we have 400 shillings in a month, then it means that even the figure that is now tax exempt according to the budget statement may still not be sufficient for households with that kind of income. So it's very, it means that there's a lot more that our government needs to be thinking about. Basically, many households being hungry, many households withdrawing children from school when they cannot buy school supplies or pay development fees and that they're. So if these things that are in the budget, I have read the budget statement, it reads very well. But if a lot of those things are not implemented or actualized, then the story will probably be worse than what we're seeing from this survey next year.
All right,
or this year, sorry.
Victor, my last question to you, though, then is the importance of this study, because these are the same group of people that you survey over time. So these are experiences, not just a snapshot, but this really is a story of their lives over a period of time. Explain to us how you do the survey.
So we have a panel that we survey every month. This panel is we established in the month of November, December. 47 counties. We have 200 enumeration areas in 47 counties, scientifically drawn population. And in each enumeration area, we have 10 main household respondents and 2 reserve respondents that we survey. And the way it works, it was a baseline, so we did a lot of activities, including household listing, which is a very expensive undertaking in research. And in addition to that, we recruited at the household level 1 person within the household that was selected. Now, we know mobile phone penetration and access or usage is not 100% or universal. So what we did is provide all our respondents with a basic mobile phone and a solar charger so that we are able to access them every month that we are doing this service. Now, what that does is that it has compensated for up to 15% of households, or up to about 18% of individuals above 18 who report not owning a mobile phone. And the solar chargers compensate for the lack of access to national grid connection because not all households have electricity connection at the moment. Now, so what we do, we then survey them, call them from our call center every month on various topics. And these topics range from based on issues that are of interest to citizens as taxpayers. So we have done several surveys. This is the 7th round we did on the issue of household economics. But we have had others to do with water and sanitation, security, health. So we have quite a number of issues and data that will help tell the story of Kenyans and what their views are, what their experiences are, what their realities are. So that is how survey works.
Okay, all right. Victor Rateng, we thank you very much. Senior Program Officer at Twaweza East Africa. These are people who've surveyed every month, and this is the 7th such study. So, of course, talking to you about that. Victor, we thank you for your time in Mombasa, but let's talk about this a little bit more, because when you take a look at these figures, it means these are people who've been surveyed every month. And these are some of the findings that they're giving us today. So my guest today will be able to talk about this a little bit more and where our policies are, what's happening with Kenya's economy. I'm so glad to be joined by Dr. Alex Awiti, who's the director of the East African Institute at the Aga Khan University. We also have Kwame Owino, who's the CEO for the Institute of Economic Affairs, and James Shikwati, from the Interregion Economic Network. Thank you, gentlemen, for talking about this. Kwame, I want to start with you. So, Rotich's budget pro poor, will it ease the burden for Kenyans, as we've seen in this survey, who are going a whole day without food?
You know, Yvonne, if there's one thing I'd advise the media, not that you have to take my advice, to do is not to try and compress a budget that is $2.6 trillion expenditure into a phrase such as a poor man's budget.
Okay.
Partly because in that budget, thousands of shillings and thousands of budget heads being supported by it. So there's few things, and I think for most of the media it was just because there's a reduction in import costs for white maize.
Yes.
The belief being that that is going to make food cheaper, and if it makes food cheaper, then obviously that's a poor person's budget. There's more to it than that, as you can tell from the survey that has shown us. So yes, I think some of it will provide temporary relief. Remember that this suspension of duty is not full-time. It's actually for just 4 months until we have our harvest in Kenya. But on the whole, I think one of the things that I think would be permanently pro-poor is if, as a country, and we don't have to wait for the budget, went out there to actually try for a policy of cheap food as opposed to rich farmers. And a policy of rich food will tell you that if 4 in 10 households in Kenya over the last 1 year have at least for 1 month had to miss a whole day's meal, that tells you that we're in serious, serious territory where the hunger that we see is actually the more manifest one when a famine takes place. But really, Kenyans are permanently at a state of hunger.
Okay, interesting, Alex, that we find ourselves in a situation like this. Basics like food, education, and shelter are things that Kenyans are having to struggle with. In fact, in that study, corruption suddenly is no longer the biggest issue of concern to Kenyans. It really is the cost of living. How did we get here, Alex?
Well, I guess, if you look at kind of the fiscal policy, which the budget really is a huge summary of, in terms of the priorities and how it tries to balance sectoral investments to achieve an overall economic growth trajectory. I think even from this budget, it's very clear that some of the expenditure proposals will not get us out of this hole. For instance, if you look at how much we're spending in smallholder irrigation, it's about 600 million Kenya shillings, but we're spending 2.6 billion in land registration and all of these things, issuing titles, etc. So even just that by itself, and as Kwame has mentioned, this temporary reduction in removal of VAT on maize importation is a stopgap measure. I don't see real investments in revamping agricultural productivity, putting money and resources in the hands of farmers so that they can produce food at a smallholder level to support our growing economies. The food we eat in Nairobi is not from large farmers. It's from the small villages in Western Kenya, in Meru, in Kisii, in Kajiado, that basically aggregate to provide food for us. And as soon as they begin to suffer, then the economy begins to hurt. Issues around education, for instance. How much relief do we need for families? And as we know, as soon as a family has more than 40,000 shilling income, they pull their kids from public schools because those schools are non-performing, there's not enough teachers, and all of these things. Now, that's who begins to suffer. Because again, jobs are scarce, the economy is not growing in the areas that we should expect it. For instance, this economy created 861,000 jobs in 2016. Those jobs are mainly Juakali, 85% of them. They pay less than 12,600 shillings a month, which is less than 400 shillings that you needed as a take-home pay from what Roteng was saying, per household. So the economy is really, really tough. And the budget in most of its major proposals is not addressing that level of spending. We are talking about big infrastructure, we're talking about security, we're talking about fiscal balance, we're talking about big, large things, and we believe that they will be trickled down. And I'm sure the gentleman here will say trickle down is a pretty tricky proposition.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that because there's that refrain about why Kenyans aren't feeling it. We'll come to that in a moment. But wasn't it also interesting that we've not sought ways to diversify our diet? So we're zero rating, maize, but then surely, there was one crude statement that was made by, a minister some time back that Kenyans should eat rats. Well, it was crude, but you could understand the point, which was perhaps we need to start diversifying. We're dependent on solely one staple food. Did you see anything in the budget that says, okay, so farming and irrigation across the board, or any policies that say we're going to try and diversify the sort of foods we grow, and whether they're, did you see any of that, Kwame?
Well, I think I remember, a couple of years ago, a study was carried out, and it showed that actually urban diets, especially in Nairobi, Mombasa, the major urban areas, actually have more diverse, especially when you talk about grains and cereals. So people eat more of wheat and more of rice, as opposed to maize. For obvious reasons, maize is very expensive relative to the amount of energy that is in it, but also its preparation is very dense in terms of the requirements to prepare it. So that's already happening. People in rural areas, some rural areas specifically, may have less of an option in terms of that, because it's often a money problem. It's actually just an income issue. But yes, I think the minister mentioned that we're expanding Galana Kulalu, Bura, and there's slices of money being given to all of them in the hope that as you expand irrigation, what happens is you're going to make food cheaper. And also, fertilizer subsidies and the seed subsidies goes ahead. But the truth is, most of that fertilizer subsidies and the seed subsidies goes to the bigger farmers, rarely to the other small farmers. In addition to the fact that this year, farmers bought it, used their own money and bought some of that fertilizer, and even that seed, which was not the right quality. So some people actually suffered. So obviously, quality control is part of a problem as well. So it's not just about the money. I think it's about whether we are really diligent to ensure that farmers are getting the right seed for their areas so that they can maximize their harvest.
Absolutely. So there was also something in it for the elderly, but for the young. And James, you work a lot with young entrepreneurs. So it's the whole issue of gambling, heavily taxed up to 50%. What were your thoughts on that? Well, of course, there's a bunch of people who are unhappy with that, saying that, it should be the companies themselves taxed and not the individuals on their individual earnings. But what are your thoughts on that, especially when you're working with young people and they're trying with their startups? Gambling and that, where does that fall?
Yeah, I think first of all there's the challenge of if there's no policy that needs to guide the gambling industry, I think that taxation in itself might not really address the challenge, because the government is interested in raising 1.7 trillion, but it doesn't know it might have to spend 3 trillion treating young people addicted to gambling. So I think if I talk from the context of the budget, I didn't see focus on productivity. Because if you're talking about a youthful nation where you are interested in tapping into the energies of young people to drive the economy, you should not really be focusing on the consumption budget, because it's a matter of raising 1.7 trillion to distribute to all these other areas for consumption. But you have young people bubbling with energy. They want to bring the entrepreneurial spirit into addressing the challenges facing the country. And if you look at the amounts allocated to that sector, we're looking at, they were put together, women and youth. It's I think it was like 3 billion. Then if you look at the amount that was allocated to industrialization, there's much to the infrastructure and little to the industrialization. So then you see that if you want to tap into young people's energy, you need to have a budget that focuses on productivity and on growing of industry.
Okay. Talk to us about this trickle-down effect, Kwame. The refrain has been that Kenyans aren't feeling the economic growth. And the Jubilee administration talks big about SGR, FDIs that are coming into the country, that we've had quite a bit. We have Iveco and all these other companies, Volkswagen, that are coming in. But still, those numbers are there. 8 in 10 households still do not make enough money. So where is that, I guess, gap? Where do you bridge that between these long-term investments, because that's what we understand SGR and the like to be, and short-term relief for the taxpayer?
Well, I think it's clear that if you have a belief in trickle-down, we're going to wait for a very, very long time. But I think most importantly, yes, those investments are actually welcome. They should come. We should have more investments. They'll provide definitely some jobs, and they'll link to other sectors of the economy. But it looks like it's too little. One of the biggest things that's driving our growth today, undeniably, is the SGR, which is an expenditure where we've spent a lot of money. And the minister actually says a single item, with the exception of salaries and with the exception of security, the single largest source of money is basically the 75 billion that's been dedicated to the standard gauge railway. And if you look at the standard gauge railway, it's trickled down. Of course, we hear that there are 20,000 people who've gotten jobs working on the line. And some goods are being bought from the country, so obviously there are people who are up there. But I think the promise of the standard gauge railway is being oversold. It is unlikely to, in as much as it's an expensive piece of infrastructure, but it is unlikely to be a savior. An economy that is this diverse and this big, with almost 700,000, 800,000 youth coming into the job market every year, is not going to be sorted out by a single piece of infrastructure construction. It's very, very clear.
Value for money out of the SGR itself?
Well, value for money, that is a story I forgot about, because it's clear. there's no value for money in the standard gauge railway. And we'll be struggling next year actually to get people to use it to haul goods. And that's part of the reason you hear right now that rules are being developed to ensure that people use it, or rather that freighters are actually almost being forced to have to use some of it or put some of their goods.
Because it isn't as lucrative for them as
it
we
will
would
not be
imagine that they would be running to take it up.
So it's a new piece, it's a very shiny piece of infrastructure, but it's very, very expensive. And what we need in this country is actually to help investors and entrepreneurs shrink their costs, not raise them in the name of a swanky piece of infrastructure called the standard gauge railway. In addition to the fact, it's clear. I mean, our neighbors looked at our example and decided they're not going that way. Many of them have actually scaled down substantially what investments they're going to make, but also chosen different infrastructure models. So yeah, that's it.
All right. Alex, then the nexus between politics, policy, and economy. Talk to us about that, and if we're thinking in the right way. I mean, surely we cannot be talking about people going without food, and even on Twitter we're asking people what they're having to go without, and we've gotten quite a number of responses. Many people are saying they go without food, others are saying they walk to work. People are having to make some really tough choices. You know, so what is that nexus between the two? I know you're able to straddle the two worlds, and talk to us about that.
I think what's interesting is that the model and the logic of the Jubilee operation is this confounding of big political pronouncements and big ticket investments, like the standard gauge railway. It's about a legacy. It's about changing the structure of the economy to benefit the top 1%. It's not, and then hoping that trickle down will happen. That logic doesn't work. But I think partly we've also identified a very lazy way to claim that the economy is growing by ratcheting up public spending. And I think that's at the heart of the problem. Because if you take out huge government spending in this part of the world, even in Tanzania, even in Uganda, you wipe out these economies to almost like zero growth, negligible growth. And that explains why there are no jobs in the real economy. The Kadogo, the Wanjikus, that's why Wanjiku doesn't see herself in this thing. Because outside huge government spending, and as James has said, this budget and this government is not investing in productivity of one of the youngest populations on the planet. You know, 80% of our population is aged below 35. The median age is just about 18. Even 25 years out, we'll still be the youngest nation on the planet. What are we doing in education, investing in real human capital and the productive elements of our economy? Industry is growing at less than 3%, agriculture at less than 5%. Those rates are surpassed by the rate of increase in human capital, even at the level of basic post-secondary education. Now tell me, if those guys are not going to be on their feet going and producing and consuming in this economy, what else are you going to do? It doesn't matter how much money you throw into this economy, as long as you're not kicking up the engines of growth and productivity at huge levels of human capital investment and going back into the places where you create mass jobs, agriculture, industry, and linking up the value chains across these systems. Like, for instance, what is the railway going to move if industrialization and agriculture are comatose? Are we just a warehouse economy that this railway is just this wonky thing, so expensive, is just to bring goods to Nairobi and then try and move those to the rest of the country? I think that, to me, is just not sensible. And I think this huge rhetoric around politics that is conflated with big spending, that is now basically the easy way to sell an economic growth and sell good policies, I think it has run its time and it needs to be called out.
All right. Where else would you have liked to see some improvements in the budget, James? Working with women and children and entrepreneurs, you know, what is it like for an entrepreneur in Kenya's economy today?
I think the missing link is the organizational ability of the women and the young people and the entrepreneurs. Because if you look at the whole budget, industry pitches its interest to the ministry, so that when the minister is putting down the budget, he has also to consider their interests, right? But you'll notice that for this group of entrepreneurs, the Mama Mboga, the Kadogos, they don't organize themselves in such a way that they too can pitch their interests.
But wasn't that the function of the youth fund and the women fund, to sort of get women and young people organized?
If you just look at the examples of projects that we see even in the counties, you'll see counties launching very nice, big, let's say, markets that are supposed to benefit traders. But then you visit just a spot check around 47 counties, you'll get most of them under lock and key. You know, you launch the project, but the traders always trade outside that
Why is
building.
that? Yeah.
And if you talk to them, they'll tell you the cost. I cannot afford 8,000 shillings per month to give to the county. One would have assumed that the county consulted them. So I think for me the biggest gap here is the inability of the ordinary citizen to organize in such a way that they too have their input into the budget making system. So without their input, then the minister has just to make some assumptions, or maybe has to get from those he'll call opinion leaders. And you know, sometimes, or most of the times, opinion leaders, we are just in the offices swinging in our nice chairs, but we are not really in touch. So for me, I mean, if I was to address the point of how the long term and the short term can connect, I think the long term, we can look at the example of the Kenya-Uganda railway. When the British were putting up that railway, they didn't really have the interest of Kenyans at heart. But if you look at our economy, since independence, it has always centered around the railway line. So there's some positive possibilities as far as this infrastructure is concerned, if we convert our mindset from having a budget where we celebrate consumption, you know, talking about it's a poor man's budget simply because ugali is cheap, to a budget where we make the poor man make more money so they can have more options to eat wherever they want to eat, travel to whatever country they want to travel to, so that we always celebrate the ability for them to have more options than the ability to have smaller options. Because I find it strange to have a headline that says that the poor man has been addressed just because now you're locking somebody to eat ugali and cabbage. And yet we should be talking about now they've got beef, fish, milk, you know, expanding
and
options.
it is up to them to decide.
Yes. So it's not a poor man's budget. Actually, it's a budget that is stagnating the country.
Okay. Your final thoughts?
Yes. My final thoughts
Where
on
we
this.
should be heading?
Where we should be heading is, I think, if you look towards the end of the budget speech, the statement, one of the things that the minister was careful about was actually to highlight the series of tax measures that he's made. One of those is basically, especially for foreign direct investors. And he made two very curious points. One is, it's true that recently, in the last 2 years, we've had a lot of interest from vehicle manufacturers or other assemblers who have come in. And they've been given a raft of very good investment conditions. I mean, a reduction in their taxes from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years. And I'm asking myself, what that means is you're asking other manufacturers who are themselves struggling to actually subsidize these others because they're foreigners. Now, if the minister is very serious about doing that, he should do it for everyone. Simply say that, look, as a government, we are so serious about manufacturing that we will give every manufacturer that 15% break for 5 years and let's see how manufacturing explodes. But here, what you're saying is we will give some people 5 years of a good time at the expense of the others.
And the locals.
That doesn't make sense. It doesn't. The investment environment in Kenya is the whole. It shouldn't be different for somebody because they bear a passport from Kazakhstan, for instance, or whatever stand they come from. It should be. So when you're doing that, anybody who's out there sees this as not very smart policy. You're actually sucking money from the manufacturers who exist to subsidize the other people who are there. But if you're serious, and I think that's good policy to actually reduce costs for everybody and back down, say we are so interested in manufacturing that if you qualify under these terms and make this amount of investment, the 5 years is available for you irrespective of where you come from. That would be a good one.
Okay. Alex?
So my final thoughts are that I'm just baffled by how the way the budget is structured displays the sectoral dysfunction and lack of coordination at a government level. Because what the left hand is spending doesn't know what the right hand is holding. There's just so much disconnection in the budget process. And I think you see that in, say, the aspirations around moving this country to an industrial age, the aspirations about how many jobs were created. We say that in 2013, $0.5 billion were coming in as FDI. Today, we're at $2.3 trillion. $2.3 billion. The question is, what is the link between these huge foreign direct investment inflows and employment on the main street? Where is the correlation between all of these concessions that we're making to enable these guys to come in, spend their money, and real jobs and real productivity for Kenyan people. The other disappointment is really around education. If you look at the development allocations for education, it's about 23 billion shillings. And if you compare that with the development expenditure that is earmarked for public administration and international relations, a whopping 112, 80% above education. So Sio now says 5,000 teachers won't cut it. They want 10,000 teachers. Where is the money going to come from? There's a massive plan to expand university education. We are creating Tomboya University.
We're also
creating
reviewing the curriculum
We're
this
reviewing
year,
the curriculum.
aren't we? Yeah.
We're creating a Lupe University. We're creating a raft of universities, including Turkana. Where is the money going to come from? We're expanding TVETs. We're creating 290 technical TTIs across the country. Where is the money and where is the teachers going to come from? So as Jem said, this is a budget that actually stifles productivity. It stifles the ordinary person. It undermines our capacity to compete in a globalized knowledge economy going forward. So in the coming days, we'll be stuck with massive, shiny, gleaming infrastructure without people to work in this economy. And we'll have so many other people come here and run over this economy at the expense of Kenyans who should be the owners of this country.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Alex Awiti, Kwame Owino, and James Shikwati. On that, what are your thoughts? James says it's locking people into just one option rather than enabling them to have options and choices. Kwame says subsidies should cut across the board, not just for foreigners in the country, but also for locals making serious investments in industry and manufacturing. Alex Awiti says disconnect in how we make our priorities and where indeed we're putting that. So what are your thoughts on that budget? Is it the pro-poor, as we, the media, have been calling it? Do you believe that this will ease your suffering and alleviate quite a bit of some of the issues that you are going through? In fact, what are some of the things you are having to go without? Maybe that is the clearest indication yet of whether this budget and indeed all others that we have had over the last few years are helping you, are indeed pro-poor, as we like to call it. Please keep your thoughts coming in. The hashtag is Checkpoint on Twitter at Yvonne Okwara. Also on SMS 22155. That is absolutely free, so keep your thoughts coming in. Gentlemen, I thank you for your time. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back. Thank you, guys.